Well, I'm excited to get started. My name is Shauna LaFosse Berry. I am the career coach for our alumni. I have some colleagues on today, if they'd like to briefly introduce themselves. Susan Brennan, Gail Grader, Charlie Fine. Would you like to say a quick hello?
Hello, Susan Brennan is here from outside of Boston. Welcome.
Excellent.
Hi,
Gail or Charlie?
everyone. Welcome. We're excited to have you here.
Good.
Hi, Charlie Fine here, reporting from my Sloan office. Welcome, everybody.
Love it. Well, thank you all for joining us. We are thrilled, really excited to welcome back Dev Bala. He is Vice President of Product Management at Coursera. He has had a fascinating story and is here to really just share some insights and have a very casual and fun conversation. So dynamic is definitely going to be the word. Like I mentioned, if you have questions, please put them down in the Q&A function, and we will make sure to leave plenty of time for them after. But I will now turn it over to Dev. Dev, welcome back, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Shauna. Thanks, everyone, for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. And the subject of the conversation is product management in the age of AI. I thought I would start off by telling you a bit about myself and then walking through these 4 points. The current state of technology, my thoughts on AI, my thoughts on product management, and some conversations around career planning. And I hope to take just a little more than half of the hour to discuss these things and then leave plenty of time for us to have a discussion. I was sharing with some of the Sloan folks before we were starting, between my time at Sloan and then my time teaching more broadly, one of the things I've learned is that age alone is not a determination of how much experience one has or how knowledgeable people are in these fields, especially given how fast things are changing. So I'm not intending to be professorial here or tell you the way it is, but rather one person's observations based on my experiences, and then let's have a discussion. And I think one of the things we're also going to wrap up with is a survey around how we create a more professional community and a place where we can have these types of conversations in perpetuity, not just in this one session. So I'm really excited about that too, and looking forward to hopefully working with all of you to do that. So let's get started. And again, please use the chat and I'll make sure we'll have live discussion at the end too. So just a little bit about me. I've had an interesting career over 20 plus years in product management. I spent the first 17 years working in big tech at Microsoft, Google, and Facebook. Most of my time is spent working on enterprise software products like Microsoft Office. I was one of the first PMs on Google Docs about 15 years ago. And then I spent some time working on hardware as well. So I worked on the Google Assistant and on Nest. And then I worked on AR, VR at Facebook. And then the past 4 or 5 years, I've been doing smaller, more mission-driven companies. So I was the chief product officer of my own startup called Centropy. It was a machine learning product that automated trust and safety and content moderation. And I was, like many of you, I bet, inspired by my time at Sloan to make a career pivot and try something different. So I started that job on the back of finishing my time at Sloan. We had a successful fundraise, we grew the company and ultimately sold it to Discord, which was really exciting to be, one for one in my startup journey. And after working at Discord for a bit, I then joined Coursera, where I currently am. So that's just a bit about how I got here. Also from the academic side, like most of you, I'm a proud graduate of Sloan. I also have 2 computer science degrees from WashU in St. Louis, which is also my hometown. And I teach in my spare time. So I've taught product management to undergrads in St. Louis, and I currently teach it to business school students here at Stanford. And then lastly, just so you don't think I'm too full of myself, this is a photo from Halloween this year, where we all dressed up as different characters from the Mario universe. So I have a 7-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son, and that's my wife, Nima. So just a little bit about me. And then this is one of the products I work on at Coursera, and something I thought I would just flash up because it's relevant to this audience in multiple ways. we were looking at how to bring AI into our product stack at Coursera. What does it mean to use AI in the world of education in 2024, excuse me. And clearly there are lots of patterns, and just looking at casual use of generative AI and ChatGPT and what have you, students of all ages are asking for homework help or, draft me an email or all these sorts of things. And I think one of the challenges we have as product managers is, how do you be unique? How do you create unique value for a user and ultimately solve their job to be done in a way that keeps them in your platform? And so for us, we built this product called Coursera Coach, and it's AI-powered tutoring, right? So it's our own LLM. It's our own model that's trained on our own corpus of millions of pieces of content. It's trained on billions of learner interactions with Coursera, and then it's personalized to each individual learner. And the idea here is that you have a personalized teaching assistant or a personalized tutor. And if you really want to nerd out, there's a concept in academia called Bloom's 2 Sigma problem, which basically says the closer you get to one-on-one teaching, the better people's educational experiences become. And so that's really hard to do with human beings. This is our attempt to do that with AI. So this is one of the products I work on, and I'll come back to this as we go. But let's get into that agenda. I thought I'd first start with just a few reflections on the current state of tech, how we got here. And again, I think a lot of folks in the audience have lived this journey as I have, and maybe some of you were kind of coming up during this journey. But in any case, I think it's worth reflecting on. I think the first stage, the confluence of these two disruptive technologies, everything moving to the cloud and the advent of, smartphones being ubiquitous, led to these twin forces that drove kind of unprecedented prosperity in the 2010s. We just saw an explosion of growth and change in the way we work, the way we communicate. And I would argue the version of Google and Facebook and so many other companies that most all adults in the world know today was really formed and shaped in that era. This was the boom time in Silicon Valley. This is when startups were growing at insane rates. And I think it would just set a lot of the foundation for the modern consumer and enterprise computing environment that we all live and operate in today. However, in 2020, as we all know, things changed. And I think I would characterize this era, obviously, I don't need to say anything about COVID that you all don't know, but I would characterize this era as a loss of fundamentals. I saw a statistic that in 2020, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft collectively hired 54% more people to their payroll in the 1 year since March 2020, right? That's just unchecked growth with an assumption that everything would move up and to the right forever. And clearly that didn't happen, right? But I think it'll make a really great and easy case study to run in business schools for the next several decades. Where did managers get that wrong? Where did they make that assumption incorrectly, that these new usage patterns and consumption patterns would continue forever? Which brings us to the third point, unwinding that 54% growth, right? So now you have another twin set of forces, which is laying people off and resetting balance sheets to match the reduction in consumption that's happening all around the world, coupled with the age of AI. So I've got a fresh, new disruptive set of automations, and I've got to reduce my burn because people aren't using my products anymore, right? And I've got to do those two things together to keep my stock price high. I think when you put those two things together, it almost feels like a bit of a reverse of part one in terms of what it means for the employee experience, right? So I give a lot of credit, not good or bad credit, but credit to Elon Musk for slashing 80% of the staff at Twitter after he bought it. And he didn't just cut to the bone, he cut past the bone and ushered in a new era of management discipline, which was cut farther than you think you need to, see if the thing still works, and if something's broken, you can rehire those people. I'm not advocating for or against that management strategy, but he clearly laid out a blueprint, and most tech CEOs have followed it, right? And you have record stock prices from companies like Meta after having slashed 25,000 jobs. So this has just upended a lot of traditional management science around cutting your way into growth. There's a great professor here at Stanford named Jeffrey Pfeffer who has written a lot of books on this. And one of his central theses for the past couple of decades is you cannot cut your way into growth. But clearly that's not what's happening right now. So a lot of unprecedented change and rules being rewritten. And so I think the big question is, where are we now? You know, for those of you who were in the industry almost 20 years ago, you might remember this famous memo from Sequoia Capital, right? RIP good times. It was in the subprime crash of 2008, and they were basically saying the world is falling apart. The other way to think about it might be that there is a new tidal wave of opportunity here. And if you have been in the game even longer than that, you might remember in the mid-90s, Bill Gates wrote this very famous memo on the internet tidal wave. And he was saying to all the other executives at Microsoft that there's unprecedented change coming around the corner, and we need to orient the whole company to be ready for what the internet will bring to the world of computing. And I think that is where we are. I think we are at the beginning of an AI tidal wave that will have a similar effect on the industry. So that's just some thoughts on the current state. Let's talk a bit about AI. What's hype, what's real, and what matters. I'd say a few things can be true at the same time. One, I think modern AI and generative AI in particular is revolutionary. Artificial intelligence, the subject, has been around for decades, but the current version of it, the thing we're all kind of reading about and using, is truly revolutionary. I also think at times it can be a solution looking for a problem. If you look at the scope of money being spent and the environmental impact of running all this compute to essentially perform like a parlor trick, that can, the cost to benefit ratio there is not exactly calibrated yet. So I think that while it does have a lot of practical uses, again, I think the hype has actually outpaced the practicality of it already. And so in this person's opinion, we are very much in an AI bubble. I would say that's true financially. If you look at the combined market value of these three big companies, it has jumped by over $2 trillion. And that number is over 100x times the incremental revenue that generative AI is supposed to add to their bottom line this year, right? So 120x multiple, that feels pretty bubblish to me, right? And for these companies to grow into that multiple requires them in this year alone to add almost $500 billion in revenue. I also think it's true practically speaking, and this is where I think we'll take the remainder of our chat. Building great software, in my opinion, still requires fundamentals. To me, as a computer scientist, AI is not magic. It is a means to that same end, which is how do we build things that impact and improve the daily lives of regular people, right? And the fundamentals of product management, who are you building for? What are their jobs to be done? How can you help them do that job better? That is still the order of the day. And whether it's cloud computing or mobile 15 years ago, or whether it's AI today, or whatever it might be tomorrow, I think those things are still largely true. And so then the question becomes, where does AI go from here? And I would say, if you take nothing away from this chat, I think the next wave of opportunity is shifting from what I would characterize as developer tools into practical applications for regular people. How can you take AI and build practical things for everyday people to just get through their lives better? Just think about the last time you sent a text message and there was a typo in it, right? We have not solved all these problems. There's still plenty of opportunity out there. I don't know which are the most important emails or text messages to reply to. When I turn on my TV, I'm just assaulted by dozens of tiles and I have choice fatigue. There's all these basic problems that I think can benefit from this technology. And I really think that's where we can go. So with that, let's talk a bit about product management, and then we'll end with some career advice and then open it up for discussion. So just as a quick reminder, to me, we're here to talk a bit about product management. This is how I would define product management. But I also wanted to say, for the rest of the folks in the audience, I think a lot of these ideas apply to tech at large, right? These are not unique simply to people with the title of product manager. I think if you work in and around technology in any capacity, the content we're discussing here and the concepts therein are going to be useful to you. So just want to lay that out there. And ultimately, you'll get to make that call. So for fun, I thought I'd ask ChatGPT, how has the role of product management changed in 2024? Let's see how smart this thing really is. And I got some interesting answers. It gave this sort of long-winded 10-step response, which I put in the notes to the slide deck, which I will also share with all of you. So you can peruse it at your leisure. But what I did is I went ahead and looked at them all and said, okay, what's true and what's not? And I kind of just made it into a bit of a heat map. I think a lot of the core concepts, and this backs up my earlier point, are not new, right? Data-driven decision-making, that's not new. I'm happy Gen AI is here, but that was always a good thing to be doing. Focusing on customer experience, that was also always a good thing to be doing, right? That was a good thing to be doing 20 years ago when you were building software. I think that was a good thing when you were selling a car on a lot in 1950. So a lot of these concepts have been here and will continue to be here. Building ethical and responsible products, sustainable products, outcome-oriented products, those things are all there. I think some of the green things are new and interesting to think about. How do you embrace automation? How do we as professionals think about our own career planning so as to not get disrupted? How do we think about cross-disciplinary skills as leaders? You know, I don't think we can be domain experts the way we were in the past. I think we have to broaden our abilities. I'll talk about that in a minute. And how do we stay abreast of evolving tools and platforms? I'll also get into that. So observation one, I think tech jobs are T-shaped today. They are both wider and flatter than they used to be. And what do I mean by that? I think there used to be an era where you could have a title like product manager, and you might have had one primary role in the broader software development lifecycle, right? And then there might have been other people with roles throughout the horizontal part of this. You might have had people doing market research and analysis. You might have had people in a corporate strategy team. You'd have separate people who are doing engineering, design, marketing, go-to-market execution, all these things. Today, my observation is that there are far fewer of these kind of hard lines between these roles, and there's an expectation that one person is able to do more of these things than ever before, right? So product managers are expected to design the mock-ups for their own products. They're expected to research the industry. They're expected to have a strategy on how they want to go to market. They're expected to write the copy, the value proposition. You know, how would I explain this to you in 30 seconds? And a great example of this comes from the founder of Airbnb, Brian Chesky, and he made some famous comments recently. One of them was around this idea of founder mode, which I'm not going to touch, but the other one was that he got rid of the product management function at Airbnb. I think what he really did is kind of what I'm talking about here. He flattened it together with product marketing and made it into one bigger, broader job. And I think that that is a trend towards being fiscally conservative, to being more lean with an org chart. And I would argue that now more than ever, you need to traverse the entire product development lifecycle to be effective as a leader. And so if you are a product manager, you need to have some ability to build prototypes and design them yourself using generative AI. If you're a designer, you need to be able to write a product specification. And if you're an engineer, you need to be able to do other things too. So this is what I mean when I say that these tech jobs are getting flatter and wider, and your ability to specialize is evolving. So let's touch on one other thing that Brian Chesky said when he kind of flattened those jobs and laid off a bunch of people at Airbnb. You know, this is something that I think we may all intuitively understand, but it's great to just stop and look at it in a picture. The more people you have, the more lines of communication you have, right? And so basically what he said is our teams are too big and it took us too much time to stay in sync with each other. And turns out, you know, I thought you'd all appreciate this as MIT folks. There's a formula you can put behind that. And there are some really stark points at which you see inflection. So a team of 10 has half as many lines of communication as a team of 14. And it has 75% less than a team of 20. So if you double the team, you're creating an asymmetric amount of more lines of communication. And so here that is in a chart for you as well. But the point Brian Chesky was making when he laid off all these folks at Airbnb was it's too expensive for us to collaborate. Now, again, I think the human cost of managing the company the way they did, hiring all these people and then laying them all off, is a separate topic, which I also have a lot of thoughts on. But from a pure organizational management construct, I think there's some good facts here to back up the hypothesis that he laid out. So I think this is just another trend that we have to think about that's shaping the job of product management. So last topic here is career planning, and then we'll open it up to some discussion. So a few things I wanted to touch on when it comes to career planning. How might we think about this in broad strokes? There are kind of 5 main points I wanted to make. And I think this is a good point to just pause and zoom out for a minute. I think, again, like my thoughts on product management and building software overall, a lot of these principles are tried and true, and they were true before generative AI. They're true today. And I think they will be true after this hype cycle dies down. And I also think they'll be true with whatever next, buzzy thing comes our way. That doesn't mean that AI is not affecting career planning. And that's what I hope to kind of share some thoughts around and then ultimately spark a discussion around. So first, this idea of go to where you're in the top 10%. I actually got this advice from another MIT alum. His name is Hugo Barra. He was a VP of Android at Google, and then he was VP of AR/VR at Meta. So our paths crossed a couple of times. I think he has like 3 MIT degrees, so clearly a smart person. And we were having a career discussion one day in the offices at Facebook. And he said, hey, the way I look at this is I want to go where I'm in the top 10%. So figure out what that is and then go focus on that, right? And the answer may be slightly different for all of us, but the point is go to where you're skilled, where you're passionate, where you're competent, where you can stand out. This was a chart I drew for myself about 4 or 5 years ago. After he gave me that advice, I tried to make a map of what that might be. And the dark red spots are the ones that are core for me, where I believe I'm in the top 10%. And I try and focus on roles that let me do this well. At that time, the kind of lighter red boxes were fringe areas where I had some skills, but maybe not top 10%. And then I started thinking to myself, okay, where are the other areas I'd like to go? And those were the gray ones, right? So this chart for me is almost like an investment slide. I have my core bets, which are the dark red things in the center, and my satellite bets, which are the things on the outside that I hope to expand to and test. And if it turns out I am good at them, I'd like to pull them into the middle over time. And I purposely did not update the slide because I thought you might find it interesting. 5 years ago, this is what I wanted to do. And I think I was able to accomplish a lot of these things. I co-founded a machine learning company, right? So it was a seed stage startup. So I tackled a bunch of these things, 0 to 1, startup, AI. I didn't get so much to the finance side of running a company or looking at international markets, but I did kind of tackle some of the biggest ones I was looking for. And so drawing this out for yourself and asking yourself, where are you strong? Where do you want to grow? And how might you actually build and invest to get there is something I would really encourage you to think about. And then lastly, to round this one out, I think it's also great to talk about what you don't want to do. And so for me, I love to keep this list off to the side. Like products that solve needs that I don't have or don't care about. It's not that they don't matter. I just know I won't have the energy to invest if I'm not personally interested in it. You might be wired differently, but for me, that's a big one. Making products grow just to inflate revenue numbers as opposed to them being genuinely good for people, right? And I think ads are a good example of that. Or social media algorithms like TikTok. I would never want to build something whose sole goal is to just get you to spend more time with it. That's just not something that interests me. And then I think other things like on-demand type stuff like peer-to-peer, Uber for X, there's just a handful of things I don't necessarily morally agree with and I think are a bit exploitative. And so I stay away from those. We all have our own moral compass, but you might ask yourself, what are these things for you? And then, it's okay to say, I don't want to work on those things. So that's one. Let's move to number 2. This is something that I more recently discovered and wrote a LinkedIn post about, and I'll summarize it here. It's this idea of being a generalist versus a specialist. And the thing I would ask you to think about is the language of range. And so a funny story, when I was looking for a new job after Discord, I interviewed with the CEO of a company who's doing healthcare technology. We had a great chat, and it was to be his right-hand person as chief product officer. I interviewed with a board, and in the end, I got rejected. and the board told him that they wanted someone with domain expertise in healthcare tech. And the CEO said to me, they want specialization, you have range, you should go find jobs that value range. And there's a book by that same name, Range, that he suggested I go read. And it was the most useful rejection I've ever received in my life, because it taught me this different language to sort of get into how to describe myself and how to describe my skills, and then how to probe and seek out what the other person's looking for, right? So figuring out which one of these people you are, and then figuring out which one of these people the other person is looking for is a critical skill. My hypothesis would be, given that this is Sloan, a lot of us might think of ourselves as generalists or multidisciplinary leaders. I think that's okay. But I think the challenge here is like, take that phrase, jack of all trades, out of your vocabulary and maybe replace it with something like, hey, I have range across a wide variety of disciplines, right? There are multiple strengths I bring to the table. And then you want to go seek out roles and opportunities that align with that and value that. So finding this vocabulary is critical. All right, next one. This is a framework I use with my students, my undergrad students from WashU, with my students at Stanford, where I am today, and that I've used in mentoring a bunch of Sloanies over the years too. And for me, it's just a bullseye. I love playing darts. I have a dartboard here in my office. So I look at it all the time. So what do I mean by this, right? I think before, in those boom times, back to where we started this conversation, you might have had a clear bullseye target. You know, a lot of people coming out of MBA programs or undergrad programs would say, I want to be a product manager at a top company, and I want to make a certain amount of money, and I want to work on a certain class of product, right? So they had specific ideas in mind for their role, their company, their salary, their industry. And in the boom times, I think aiming for the bullseye on your first shot was a reasonable expectation, especially if you came from a top business school, had a great pedigree or track record previously. But this is a very reasonable way to think about your career. Aim for dead center, know what you want, and keep shooting till you get it. Times have changed, right? I don't think we live in this market anymore. And so oh yeah, I'm just seeing in the chat. I am not a gatekeeper of information. I will send out these slides as they are along with the recording. So don't worry about that. So times have changed, right? And what I would say is now, and probably until 2028 or so, until we enter a new level of normalization, I think a lot of things have changed. So first off, I think the market has been flooded by semi-qualified people. And I don't mean that as a judgment, but that hiring rate I was talking about earlier, you can't say that we only hired the best people and we have this elite hiring bar, but also grow your payroll by 54% in 1 year, right? Like those two things cannot both be true. So I think a lot of companies have overhired and they've hired semi-qualified people, and it's not those people's fault. I think it's the company's fault. I think the job has also evolved, as we were talking about with the Airbnb example. And so I do not think you can aim for the bullseye and get there in one shot like you used to be able to in the past. I think figuring out how you can work on meaningful products at innovative companies, worrying less about title and job function is a better way to think about this. I think when you look at how much the average tenure has dropped in a given role, you need to be comfortable with this idea of taking a few shots and getting closer to the center each time. So it's fine. Like, you should have a bullseye in mind. You should have an ideal place you want to go. And then can you get okay with taking a few shots to get there, especially given that the average tenure has gone down, right? I might be able to get where I want to go in 3 shots over a 5 to 6 year period. But if I keep holding out to get there in one shot, I might waste multiple years waiting for that opportunity. And so, you know, again, if companies are willing to lay people off at unprecedented rates, we as the talent pool need to be willing to make changes more frequently as well, right? You have agency in this equation. So that's another framework I would throw out to you. So I think there's just 2 or 3 more slides and concepts, and then we'll wrap it up. this is a big one. I think a lot of folks were interested in. How do you position yourself for AI-centric roles? I'd say there's a few things. First off, there's how can you add AI to your portfolio today? I would tell you, like, the easiest thing to do is just get started, to not be afraid of these technologies, to just open them up and use them. But I would ask you to go farther than tinkering and actually try and build something, right? I think and I'm going to show you some examples, but I think it's never been easier to build things yourself, even without a computer science degree. I think that's one of the points of this new wave of technology, is that it's democratizing abilities to do a lot of things that were previously, only available to folks who had specialized knowledge and experience. Another thing I'd say is to don't wave your hands around generative AI, but have specific ideas. And I'll call out our own community for just a minute. I went to the Delta V startup pitch sessions here in Silicon Valley a month ago or something. And all the pitches were really short. And so they didn't have time to get into specifics, but every group said, and with generative AI, we can save XX% or YY dollars off of our burn rate. In a 2-minute pitch, maybe that's all you can say. But can you actually have specific ideas? What could you actually use generative AI for in your day job, current or future? Right? Waving your hands around it and using that buzzword is not enough anymore. I don't know that it ever was, but it certainly isn't going forward. Few other thoughts here, like how do you position yourself for a role in a company around this? I actually say first, it's worth breaking them out into a few different swim lanes. First off, there's working on AI directly, right? Like, let's say you were a product manager or you were working on products at companies like OpenAI or Anthropic or Google Gemini or Microsoft or something like that. First off, I just don't think there's that many of those roles, right? Like, that is a rare and narrow slice of the broader AI career ecosystem. If you want that, go get it. But I think the frequency of those jobs is smaller. I think the thing that's bigger is closer to what I'm doing, which is building products in a company that wants to be AI-centric and building products to help it transform from its past version to its more AI-centric version. I think that's far more likely, right? Because you're leading the transformation, you're leading the change, you're bringing AI into the existing value proposition. Most companies are in that spot. And the other thing that I think might also be true is that a lot of you might just be starting from scratch here. You may have hardly used these technologies at all. It may be intimidating. It may be scary. And I just want to acknowledge that group of people in the room and encourage you to not be nervous or not be afraid to get started and try. I think the time and the experience gap from knowing nothing about this space to knowing enough to be like minimally competent, proficient, is shorter in this wave of technologies than it has been in those other big disruptive waves like cloud or mobile or internet 25, 30 years ago. Because I think making the technology and the concept easy to understand is a feature of this technology itself, right? Whereas those other transformations were not necessarily made to be simple to understand. They were complex ideas from the start. This thing also has the ability to explain itself in simple ways. So the point I'd make to you here is, there's a lot of talk about having a growth mindset. There's a Stanford professor, Carol Dweck, who wrote a book around that. Wonderful framework, but I'd say the future evolution of that is to have more of an agency mindset here, right? You have control. You can invest, you can increase your familiarity and comfort levels around these technologies. All the tools you need are right there in front of you. You don't need to go back to school for this. You don't need to have a computer science degree for this. And I think that's just a really exciting aspect of this wave of growth we're in. Let me give you an example. Outside of everything else I do, I also coach lacrosse at Stanford, and one of my former players, he's 22 and he was a humanities major at Stanford. He comes from a small town in South Carolina, first person in his family to go to college, first person from his town to go to Stanford. And he benefited from all this amazing coaching, wisdom, advice that he had received from people. So he wanted to build a platform that is essentially a life OS, or guidance counseling at scale, if you will, to help young people plan their life and figure out What should they study? Where should they volunteer? What are their interests? What might they be good at? Where should they go to school? What scholarships should they apply to? What essays should they write? Things that some folks pay six-figure sums to get their kids private coaching around. He wanted to democratize that, right? And build a software platform to do that. So he was able to build a fully functional piece of software using new technologies that I had never heard of just 4 or 5 years ago, and build this UI and build the code behind it and build a fully functional piece of software just by prompting generative AI. So he was able to build that front end by prompting Midjourney and other kind of graphical AIs. And then he was able to write the code behind it by prompting, again, other types of AIs, right? So here you see code getting generated from his prompts on the left. Again, this is a 22-year-old humanities student with no computer science background. And I show this to you because, again, I think if someone with that background can build something like this, I think it just kind of shows the democratized opportunity that is out there for all of us. So to wrap this up, I think, there's a challenge here to think fast and slow, having long-term ideas for what you want to do with your career, but have a bias to short-term action is critical. I think things are just changing so fast that you having a 3 to 5 to 7 year plan is not practical. I also think job searching has changed a ton. I was telling Shauna this story about how I was having a dinner with someone who was at a very hot startup, and she said every time they post a new job description on LinkedIn, they get over 10,000 AI generated resumes and applications within 48 hours. And so the noise to signal ratio is just unprecedented. And so she said that she tells her recruiters that they basically have to ignore all of that and they only focus on internal referrals. And that is a challenging world to be in. And so again, the opportunity we all have is to acknowledge that, embrace it, and figure out how to succeed given those new constraints and those challenges. And I think looking for a job in this era can be very Sisyphean. It's very, very challenging. It can feel like you're pushing this boulder up the hill. But one of the things I love best about this story is a separate book I read in my undergrad days when I was also studying French. And, this famous line from Camus where he says, like, hey, the struggle itself is important. And, one must imagine Sisyphus as being happy, right? So you have to find joy in this task. You have to find joy in this process. Last point, and then we'll go to Q&A. Shauna asked me this interesting question. I thought I'd just tackle it head on. Does it matter that you went to MIT? Does it matter that you have access to this community? Or has it all been democratized so much that that doesn't matter anymore? So my thoughts are, like they taught us back at Sloan, well, it depends, right? So does it matter? Maybe not. AI is moving at warp speed. And I think if you're relying on the classroom or the institution alone to prepare you for this era, that may not be enough, right? I would also argue maybe so. The hard skills we've all learned at a place like this, the ecosystem of fellow classmates, alumni, faculty, the access to experts and community we have is unique. And that is not something you can just put behind a GPT, right? And I'd say some successful examples I'd offer there. The communities that I've stayed engaged in, have been a part of, like we have a MIT Club of Northern California. And so this cuts across the whole university. Whatever year you were there, whatever school you were in, there's a very vibrant community out here. There's obviously the Sloan community, being part of Delta V and attending their pitches. We have other alum doing local groups here in the area, and they bring us together. And I think that being a part of those communities and not only just attending the sessions, but contributing to them and giving to them, I think is a key ingredient to success. And so the people I've observed getting the most out of the MIT ecosystem and the MIT community, this may feel counterintuitive, but they are not consumers of those communities. They're givers first. And I'd like to think even me, conducting a session like this with you all, I'm trying to do that exact same thing myself. And my observation is if all of you are able to do this in whatever way makes sense, getting that flywheel going of networking and being in the arena and being in the conversation and connecting other people around you, even if it's not to your own immediate benefit. I do think that's a necessary ingredient to get started and to stay relevant and to be part of the current conversation around how the industry is changing and how AI is changing all of our careers. So with that, let me just say thank you. I appreciate everyone's time and attention. And I had a few questions that were sent to me over email, but let me also just let me pause and ask Shauna, or one of the facilitators, if there are some high-ranked questions that maybe we ought to address first.
We do have 9 questions in the chat. They are not all ranked yet. If people want to give a rank to them, that would be great. And I think maybe it makes sense to go to those questions. We could try, or we could go one to other. Alex in the chat has a question about the state of the job market for senior director and above PM roles. He says he has a similar background to yours.
Yeah.
And it's been challenging since the 2023 layoff.
Yeah. Let's take that one first. And again, I wish I had like some demographic readout on everyone who's here, but I'm sure there are many of us with this same situation, right? So first off, let me just say, Alex, I have also struggled to find jobs over these past 4 or 5 years. So you're not alone. Even after selling my startup to Discord, I vested out of that deal and left Discord at the end of 2022, thinking everything would be great and I'd be able to find a new job in no time. That was not what happened. I went through the longest unemployed stretch of my career, and I got more rejections over a 6-month stretch than I had in my entire 20+ years of work. So it's easy for me to tell you that the story worked out now, but it certainly didn't feel that way then. What I would say first off, and I know this is really hard to do, but it's, can you give yourself space? Can you give yourself grace? Can you, find other folks who've been in your situation, acknowledging that it's really tough, and just not beating yourself up. Honestly, that was one of the hardest things for me to do. So that's why I'm saying it first. I'd say, practical advice on how to move forward. First off, for me, going back to teaching has always been like a shelter in a storm. It's a thing I do largely for free. I'm in a fortunate position where my spouse also works. And so if I go at some period of time without earning my regular tech salary, it's okay. But going back to academia and teaching and being in that environment helps me to stay relevant and helps me to stay connected. I think there are other tactics I've heard from folks around picking up freelance work or getting involved in mentoring and coaching startups, getting involved in your local ecosystem. I think like these things, while they may not turn a financial profit for you immediately, staying involved is the most critical advice I can give. And having a portfolio approach where staying involved means many things, not just finding a new job, because that one thing, as you've said, is really hard. Can you do other things to stay active is the key advice I would give. And you're right, it is perplexing to land an interview. And like I said, with the person I was speaking to, if they're getting all this AI generated noise in the application process, it is really hard to break through that. So the last piece of advice I'd give here is you have to create a list of the jobs and companies you'd like to work where you know people. And for me, starting with that list has been the only way I've found success. Where I can pick, again, not all these people will call you back, by the way, but where I can try to talk to a human and say, hey, remember me? We were in class together, or our kids went to school together. Can you help me with this? Right? I started with that as opposed to starting with the jobs I like and then maybe I know people there. Because that felt like the only way I might speak to a human in this whole process.
Deb, it sounded like you also did some self-reflection really about being clear about your strengths, that top 10%.
Yeah.
Okay, another question from Connor Fox. He's seen a lot of remote first PM roles, and it makes collaboration quite difficult. Are there any thoughts on ways to do this more effectively with or without Gen AI tools?
Yeah, I think jobs that are highly collaborative, and creative as well. Like building software products is a creative job too. I think that's hard to copy paste into a fully remote world, right? And the advice I would give is we have to update our toolkit around how we work and how we communicate. And even something as silly as just like scheduling an hour to have lunch together with your team, like inventing new ways to feel connection with people and to have informal discussion with people, I think is really helpful. Getting comfortable with working with remote teams, I think, again, how do you update your skill set? How do you invest in building relationships with people? It takes a lot of time. It takes, especially as a leader, I think adapting new frameworks to help people get to know each other, to kind of distribute work and let people be more directly responsible for things. So it's not as easy to hide behind a Zoom with the camera turned off, right? Like these are all managerial skills I've had to develop over the past few years. Calling meetings, which nobody likes, but calling meetings and asking people to show up and present the status of their work is one of the simplest of most effective things. And while people hate it and they might accuse me of being like a micromanager, I heard a great saying the other day, like, hey, micromanagement in and of itself doesn't have to be a bad thing. It doesn't have to automatically insinuate negativity. It might just mean I want to roll up my sleeves and get into the details with you, right? So it's not about me monitoring your work and making sure you're not being lazy. It's about me caring about it and wanting to partner with you. And the only way we can do that is if we both, shoulder up next to each other and talk. So I think even just reframing some of these constructs into a remote first environment and helping people, adjust their own mental models is key.
Perfect. So prioritizing the connection for sure. Here is another question, and it is from Aisha. For product managers new to AI ML domains, what advice do you have on effectively partnering with engineering and data science teams to drive innovation without getting lost in the technical depth?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I'll give you a concrete example. So when I joined Coursera, we were, the AI coach I showed you, it was trained on all of our own content. And the thing I wanted to do is train it on me, the learner, me, the job seeker. And so one of the things I did was I just started tinkering around with all the other AIs out there. And I'll just tell you very quickly, went to LinkedIn, I had it print my resume as a PDF. I uploaded it to like the top 5 Gen AI tools. And I said, okay, hey, this is who I am. Tell me you understand. Great. And then I said, based on who I am, what types of jobs do you think I should look for next? Or I said, based on who I am, how good of a match do you think I would be for this specific job? And at Coursera, we refer to this practice as using generative AI as your thought partner, right? So tell it about yourself and then start asking it questions to compare things and help you sort of analyze 2 disparate sets of information, e.g. your resume and a job description. And in doing that, I was able to sort of demonstrate to my engineering team, here's how we can prompt an AI to better coach individuals on their fitness for a certain job. I wanted them to build that feature natively into our product, but showing them how well it could work on some generic AI was a great first step to build that trust. And so coming back to your question, I would look at generic AIs and test your ideas on them or test similar ideas on them so you can start to build some comfort or some understanding of how those use cases might unfold, and then take that and go have a conversation with your engineering team, right? So I always my mind always goes to some proxy experience or some proxy product I can test with commercially available tools today to prove that there's something behind my idea, right? And there usually is. And so when you can do that, you can build trust and you can captivate someone's attention and imagination. And so in doing that little exercise, just using ChatGPT, I was able to convince my engineering team, like, hey, this is a valuable thing, because now they can marry public models with the models we've trained on our educational materials and say, hey, here's your resume, here's the job you want, and here are the classes I think you should take to get that job, right? And that's something only we can do. So I would encourage you to just start playing with the tools and building a familiarity and the comfort level with how they work, and then using that to converse with your engineering teams. And I do not think you will get lost in the technical details if you just kind of like try it the way I was describing.
Beautiful. Deb, we'll have two more questions, but I did want to highlight, we are putting in the chat that survey that Dev mentioned. It's about a community of practice and how you could see having more of these type of dialogues where we're learning from each other, bringing in industry insight from alumni like yourself, Deb. So if you could fill this out now or in follow-up, it would be really valuable. Okay, so next question is from Christina, and she's seeing more recruiting outreach for CPTO roles versus CPO roles. Curious on your thoughts of the flattening and how this will impact the product leadership structure.
Yeah, that just reminds me of this slide. This is happening at all levels of the organization, right? So as an example, my boss at Coursera is the head of product, design, engineering, data science. I would argue he's oversubscribed, but he's got all these different departments rolling up to him. And I've observed this happening at many companies, honestly. And so, what might you do with that and how might you succeed in that environment? I think first off, that role may not be for everybody, right? Are you really able to level up, and do you want to level up and take on leadership of all the engineering and design and XYZ responsibilities? Not everybody wants that, right? But if you do, I think one of the challenges we have here is being able to understand the complexities of that overall product development lifecycle in this era that we're in. And so I think it requires being really familiar and fluent in the language of building software. And can you actually talk that talk and walk that walk with engineering directors and VPs? Can you actually do that with a design team? Can you actually do that with all these other functions? I think the flattening is also just management trying to reduce costs and combine two jobs into one, if I'm being really candid. Could you benefit from having two exceptional leaders, each owning half of that equation? Almost certainly. But in an era where we don't have that, I would say if you want to go for that role, you need to be fluent or competent. And then I would go and ask, well, who is the next most senior person? Let's say if I'm the product person, who is the next most senior person in the engineering world? And can I rely on them to be my right-hand person and someone who can support me and that we can really partner with? So I would say there's a danger in this flattening to take on more scope than you can readily manage. And you don't want to set yourself up for failure, right? So I would make sure that there are actually other people in the organization who have more subject matter expertise so that you may be able to be a broad generalist, someone with range, as we were saying, but also rely on specialists.
Lovely. All right, one more question from Mosh Ben. For product managers with 5 to 8 years of experience, but without a technical degree, seeking roles in big tech or LM-focused companies, what challenges might they face in securing these positions?
Yeah. So first off, I'd say the number one challenge you are going to face is a signal to noise ratio challenge, right? It doesn't matter that you went to MIT. It doesn't matter what other skills you have. There's just a law of large numbers problem that's not working in your favor, right? Few jobs, many applicants. Beyond that, though, I'd say, if you don't have a technical degree, I think that's okay. I think the industry made that okay more in the past 7 to 10 years than when I started. If you didn't have a computer science degree, you were just not qualified to be a product manager, right? That has changed. I think that's generally okay and maybe even a good thing. But the way you stand out is I think you have to have a specific point of view. You have to have a specific skill set, a specific idea for what you want to do and how you can contribute to that organization, to that product team, to whatever it might be. And that is something that's hard to fake. And it's hard to wave your hands and say, I know about this space or I know about generative AI. Now you can, again, let's go back to what I said earlier. Like at Coursera, we say, use it to be your thought partner. I have used this thing to write cover letters to great effect. I have used it to, find talking points. I upload other people's resumes and I'm like, tell me 3 things that the 2 of us could talk about over coffee, right? So using it to be prepared and then using it to help formulate that specific point of view, using it as your thought partner, I think is key. Being original is essential in a situation like this. Having your own point of view, your own brand, your own framework of storytelling and your own framework of articulating a value proposition, you need that now more than ever. Because I think all of our resumes look more and more alike and they've converged more than ever before. And so the way you show up online, the way you show up on LinkedIn, and the way you show up even in email, I think all of those surfaces become critical, and the job is just a lot harder to find your next opportunity. And embracing it, having that agency mindset, not being afraid to try things, getting comfortable with rejection, getting comfortable with the idea that you might have a new job every 2 to 3 years for the next 20 years. Those are not things that I particularly enjoy, but I have forced myself to come to terms with, and I would suggest all of you consider the same.